Hello, hello, hello. It's excellent to see everybody here. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us today for how to architect international sites at scale. We are really excited to share this with you. It's really cool to see folks from all over the world here. So I want to cover a few housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation. One of those is there's a chat window. I think a lot of you have already discovered this, but continue sharing where you're from. One of the things is at the end of this is Ramin's going to share a demo. And ideally, if you go to the site, you should be redirected to a page that shows your the flag of your country. So please keep sharing those, and we look forward to seeing that at the end of the demo. Also, there will be a Q&A at the end of this, so please share your questions in the Q&A panel to the right, and Ramin and I will answer those at the very end of this. And you can upvote questions there if you want to see those answered. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and shared out, so please feel free to take screenshots, to take notes, but also know that this will end up in your inbox, so you can share it or rewatch it or anything you need to do. So without any further ado, I'm happy to jump into this. So I always like to start off with a goal. So what is the goal of this webinar? It's to equip you with the tools and tactics to internationalize your sites at scale. So yes, we're going to talk a lot about Netlify features and how Netlify features and functionality make this easier. But I also wanted to cover some strategies that when we talk to clients, some pitfalls that hopefully you can discover before you start to add your second, third, fourth international site. I should have introduced myself. I'm Mike Chirokis. I'm a product marketing manager here at Netlify, and I'm joined by Ramin Siddiqui, who you'll meet in a moment, and he's a senior solutions engineer. Ramin's going to dive into some of the specific tactics. But so, as I mentioned, what to look out for when you're internationalizing your site. I'll cover that, some strategies, some questions to ask. Ramin's going to dive into what a microsite architecture is and how you can implement that for your business. And then he's going to show a demo of how country-based redirects on Netlify work at the edge to route users to the correct version of the site. So first of all, let's just level set. What do we mean by architecting international sites? So I want to take a few examples of some sites that we have helped teams internationalize. So on the left, we've got Medallia. You can see their URL structure there for marketing sites, and they also use different components for their homepage for example in the United States versus in Spain. Another example of an e-commerce site in the middle here is Manscaped. Manscaped's US site is on their main domain, and then their German site's on a subdomain. And then same thing with Paul Valentine using a subdomain structure. So what do you want to look out for when your sites go international? We want to help you catch these sooner. One, copying and pasting themes slows development and introduces bugs. So for example, if you have a Shopify theme and that may be working for your German store, and then you want to move into a different market, copying and pasting that can cause some bugs, and we'll discuss that, some more specifics there. Some workflow inefficiencies that you may have today are going to quickly multiply when you start adding more international sites. So we're going to discuss some strategies to improve those. And then also lack of definition around the type of localization and internationalization may lead to fixes that don't scale. So we want to help you catch those. One, copying and pasting themes slows development and introduces bugs. So what do I mean by this? This stack is actually the stack that Manscaped used. And this was on a monolith, on a Shopify monolith. They had a number of applications, which was working pretty well for them. It could be faster, it was working pretty well. Then they introduced a German site. Well, you make one change on the US site, and an API on the German site gets out of sync, causes a bug. Well, then you need to add another site. Say you want to add a site for the UK. Bugs can get introduced all downward, horizontally, upward, quickly gets out of hand. So recommendation here is to decouple to a Jamstack architecture. So decoupling the front end from the back end makes it a lot easier to create many more international sites. I'm not going to dig in too much because Ramin's going to cover some of this later on, but that's the recommendation. Also, a little cheesy here, but some side effects of the Jamstack. Decoupling is improved security, improved developer speed, and also you're going to end up with some faster sites, which are kind of nice on the back end. One of the second issues we see is that workflow inefficiencies get multiplied when you add on multiple international sites. So let's just take an example of getting content to market today, how you do it. So we've seen teams that have a content marketer, maybe create some content, passes it off to a web developer to create a preview. Then that web developer creates that preview in a staging environment or something along those lines, passes it on to a marketing manager. If you're in financial services, a compliance team says that okays that, goes back to you as the web developer, you publish, and then maybe 6 months, a year down the road, an SEO strategist comes in and says, hey, we want to make some more changes, and then it comes back to you. This may work today, but when you start to add multiple sites, a US site, a German site, a Japanese site, it starts to get, these inefficiencies start to multiply. So here's an example. You don't need to read through every single one of these, but you start to add in a German translator that then passes it off to you. You see a lot of pink here. You see a lot of web developers focusing on getting content published when really you want to focus on the things that you're really good at. Content teams should focus on the things that they're really good at. So a recommendation here when you are going to internationalize your site is partner with other folks to map content workflows that include your translation services, whether they're in-house via a localization team that you have, or maybe it's a service provider that you're using. And so here's an example of what that might look like. Who's going to create content? How is that going to be translated? And then here's an example of how Netlify actually can help with this workflow. So who's going to trigger a deploy preview from your content management system? Today, perhaps it's you as a web developer or someone on your team that's actually putting this into the CMS, testing out the deploy, then passing it off. But with Netlify deploy previews, you can actually have folks on your team deploy content to a preview mode and kind of get you out of that flow so you can focus on the things that you want to be focused on that you're really good at. Also, consider empowering translation providers to update, preview, and publish pages. So here's an example of how a Spanish translator can actually deploy a preview, kind of what we talked about a moment ago, and then it goes to a localization manager. And finally, pick technology that supports the content journey. So for example, some localization vendors that connect directly into your CMS and then can be built, hosted, and scaled on Netlify. So an example, a couple that you may see are SmartLing and Transifex that kind of integrate with Contentful, Sanity, Shopify, Bloomreach. Finally, another issue we see is a lack of definition around the type of internationalization may lead to fixes that don't scale. We want to help you answer those questions before you get there. So what do I mean by that? What's a type of internationalization, sometimes called localization, some of these? So it could just be translation. So we have a client, Solanus, basically, who has translated parts of their site. Take the header is in English and in German. Or maybe it's a little bit more advanced, closer to localization, like Medallia, who has a different images for their US site versus their Spanish site versus their Italian site versus the 14 other sites that they have international versions. And so, for example, you can see in the Medallia image there, they actually have a different event for the United States, a different header that they want to show versus folks in Spain, maybe it's a US event. And then finally, all the way to the right, maybe there's completely different core functionality that your site has based on the country that you're localizing or internationalizing into. And so an example here is Manscaped's checkout flow, which they built part of, is actually specific to the German market. So recommendation here is to define the type of internationalization so that you can catch and avoid fixes that aren't going to scale, fixes that 14 sites later you've already solved for. So you can do this by answering 6 questions. I perhaps recommend taking a screenshot of this, but I'll run through them pretty quickly. Will we require different images or components for different sites? So think about the homepage for the English versus the Spanish version of Medallia.com. What will the international gateway look like? So the international gateway is that maybe it's a drop down that has US, maybe it has UK, maybe it has Australia or something along those lines. What is that going to look like? Who is going to translate the site? Is this going to be an external provider? How do you work them into the workflow? Is this maybe a completely different team? So going to question 4, who owns the site? Do you have a Japanese localization team that's actually going to own this site? Or is this going to be centralized? Will defaults fall back to one country or to be decided on a country basis? So think about this for token defaults in a checkout flow. Who in the SEO team do I need to collaborate with? So this is one of these things that you want to catch early on, is collaborate with the folks in the SEO team about subdomain structures, about sending out href langs in scripts versus in sitemaps. Having those discussions earlier on will make it way easier to scale. It can help you do that. Then finally, e-commerce teams, add these 3 questions. What payment options will each country have? If the visitor switches their international gateway, so that thing on the right, what happens to the cart? And this isn't necessarily because lots of folks are going to be shopping in Germany and your German site, add a couple things, and then go back to the UK site. It's actually to help you think about the workflows for how you use context if you're working in a React e-commerce application, and how that gets passed around. And then finally, how will country-specific holidays and sales be handled? So coupon codes, specific landing pages for, say, Singles Day in Korea. And I'll pass it off to Ramin.
Excellent. Excellent. Everyone can hear me okay? Mike, thumbs up if you can hear me. Anyone? All right. Netlify provides, by the way, just want to quickly introduce myself, everyone. My name is Ramin. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Netlify, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and have been with Netlify for almost 2 years. So excited to share some common patterns that we see for customers building on internationalized sites on the platform, and really looking forward to maybe continuing conversations and talking specifically about your projects that you're considering later down the line as well. Netlify's platform, as the slide suggests, Netlify provides a platform that gives developers a really clean and well-tested strategy for building sites with multiple locales or multiple domains without having to piece together an infrastructure or spend a lot of time getting your code to the market. So this platform, Netlify's platform, is designed for developers, for content editors to focus on building the great experience that your international customers expect from your brand, but without your team, without your content team, without your development team, having to spend a lot of time and cycles getting that experience to those end users. So what does this all look like for the Netlify platform? And Mike, if you don't mind, can you go to the next slide? Oh, sorry, I'm following. It's me. So for Netlify, the web project cycle essentially replaces a really complex web infrastructure and workflow that Jamstack teams typically see when they deploy their apps. So in a build your own environment, you typically need dev servers and staging servers with automated build and testing as your CI/CD platform. And then eventually, once you build your site, you need to deploy that site to your production servers, UAT servers. There's a lot of orchestration that happens in terms of cache management, redirects, proxies, maybe if you're using serverless functions as well. And how do you roll all of this to production in a quick manner? So Netlify's platform is really designed to give teams who are developing Jamstack applications a really quick workflow from just pushing your code to Git and getting that site from Git to Globe in an internationalized, even if you're serving internationalized customers. And what this platform provides and gives our customers is the ability to push code faster to market. There's less friction between development teams as you're collaborating and building in parallel. And essentially the Jamstack itself will provide a lot of security and performance enhancements for your web application. So now, in terms of building internationalized sites on Netlify, there's many ways we can build internationalized sites today. It's not just one single way, and it really depends on specific projects that you're looking at. So for every team, how you might internationalize your site might differ based on the different technologies that you're using within your organization and the different requirements your CMS editors have. So there's a lot of dependencies, and these are just some of the ways teams are building internationalized sites on Netlify today. One way is teams typically build a microfront end architecture. So this means they use a single code base and they build individual sites for each of those internationalized markets. So let's say you have a US site. That US site is pulling content from your CMS and translation services, but it's building on top of your main code base. And then this process gets repeated for any additional languages. So your content team pushes content, and again, Netlify will build your site with the correct internationalized version of that. Netlify will build your internationalized version. There's other solutions as well, like framework-specific solutions and single code base. But today we'll focus on the microfront end because we do have great resources and a lot of documentation on this. And this is typically how teams are building really large sites internationally because with the microfront end architecture, it does give teams the ability to really speed up their build times as well. So what does this mean when we split our site into multiple, smaller sites? What are the benefits here, and why do we do this? Again, if you have just a single US site and there's maybe years of content in there, and you want to statically generate all of that, this could certainly make your site build times a little bit longer. And there are strategies to maybe you can use that we would like to share. Maybe you don't necessarily have to build everything statically. You maybe need to build the 100 most visited content statically and then the rest dynamically. But you're going to have to repeat that process for both the US site, the Canada site, German site, Italian site, Indian site, so any other internationalized version sites that you have. So this micro front-end architecture allows you to leverage a single code base, and the content that's getting pulled in from your translation services could be in various multiple languages, but you're pushing all of those languages to a single code base, which builds multiple sites for you. Now, when a user accesses your main site, so they go to www.site.com, they can either be taken to site.ca based on how you've set up your domain, or they can be sent to site.com/ca, which is the path for the Canadian site. And this is all happening with Netlify's edge redirects. So Netlify's edge redirects are purposely built to handle all of these complex logics for teams. Whether you have a customer that's coming in, again, from a German location, let's send them to the German page. And Netlify's redirects is sitting at our edge servers. So along with proxying, redirects, rewrites, and our headers, everything is computed at the edge server. So there's no additional hop in traffic when we need to determine, hey, do we need to send this user to a German site or Italian site or a French site? That happens immediately as soon as we get that header information from the server request. So then we send the user to the appropriate site, and that experience becomes very seamless for our customers. And you have now created essentially an internationalized version of your site. And that workflow, the user flow of this interaction follows this pattern. User accesses, again, main.com from the US location. And our edge server, again, determines that their country of origin. And based on the country of origin and the rules that you have created in your redirect files on Netlify's platform, they're going to be sent directly to the correct version of your site. So this is, in short, how teams are accomplishing the redirect workflow on Netlify. Whether you're building micro front ends, or even if you're building a single code base, maybe your application is not large enough to split everything into a microfront end as well. Essentially, you're still going to be using Netlify's redirects engine to handle all of these, the user flows and sending the user to the correct version of the site. So with this, maybe I can give you a quick demo of how I built a really simple version of an internationalized site. And I wanted to make it a little bit interactive. So as Mike mentioned, we collected some countries of origin from everyone early on in the meeting. And I went ahead and created a simple site that hopefully shows your country flag when you visit the site. And I will caveat this: I didn't get to every single list here. I think I got maybe like 85%. So please don't be offended if I didn't get to that country. It's just Mike ran through his slides quick enough, so my apologies. Here's the country here's the application that I've created. First of all, let me just jump into the team on Netlify so that everyone can see what I'm working with. This is my Netlify platform. This is where all of the changes that I push to this GitHub repository get triggered with a new build, right? So I've had 16 commits to this project, and essentially I've had 16 equivalent builds on Netlify's platform. And what's really cool about Netlify is you can see that I just added India here, and I can preview deploy that specific deployment that I made with when I added India in there. And I have a unique URL. I know it's showing the Canadian flag, but we're just showing a preview. But this is a preview URL of that specific deploy that I made where it had India in there. So now let's look at the actual application itself. So the URL is netlify country redirect.netlify.com. I'm going to put this link in the chat for you all. So when I click this, hopefully I get the US flag, right? Because I'm based out of the US. Now, I've added let me show you all the list of countries that I've added in my code base. We have Canada, Germany, France, India, Italy, Mexico, UK, and US for now. So if you're from any of those countries and you access this, the link that I just dropped, you're automatically going to be taken to the correct static version of that site. And it is all done with the redirects that I've created here in my Netlify TOML file, right? So for example, the US says that if the country of origin has a US in the header, then send the user to the correct path, which is the index US. And similarly, if you're from Germany, send the user to this German path. And this process is, for me, I just did it very simply because I wanted it in one single HTML application for this demo. But the redirect file essentially follows the same pattern for you, whether you're using a microfront end with separate applications hosted on Netlify, or if it's just a single code base using multiple paths in your application, right? So the magic is all happening here in the redirect. So whether you architecturally build microfront ends or single code bases, this is all how it's coming in together. So this completes the demo. I hope it answered a lot of questions for you all on how to internationalize sites with Netlify, maybe even introduce some of you to the Netlify platform and the capabilities we offer here for Jamstack developers. And looking forward to see if you have any questions now. Omid, yes. Is there any way to emulate a user accessing specific countries so that you can check if it works? I use the VPN service, but if you are a little bit more hacky savvy, you can probably change the header country of origin. So the NF country cookie, you can change that and see if it corresponds correctly. So, is there a guide to creating redirects? Yes, great question. So we do have great documentation for redirects, and I'm going to just share that link here for you all. And in fact, let me go ahead and just share my screen as I just show you I guess I'm not able to share, but essentially the link that I put in the chat is the redirects documentation. It's really in depth. It talks about how all of the different configurations that you can do and the best practices. Yeah, Sven, how do you handle user requests that are routed through a VPN server hosted in a different country? So that VPN is essentially going to be the country of origin for them because Netlify is recognizing the server request as the origin country. So if you're using a VPN and you go to India, you're going to get the India site essentially. Any implications with GDPR compliance? None, Patrick. We do. I think there's certainly things to think about for GDPR. If your internationalized site is collecting information for users, you certainly want to handle that locale a little bit more differently than other locales, right? So for GDPR compliance regions, and if you're collecting user information, you may have other strategies that you want to incorporate there. Impact on response time, Parvish, fantastic question. This is, I think, where Netlify really shines here in the redirects process because the edge is handling all of the redirects for us. The edge, the compute of redirects, proxies, and rewrites. When a request is sent to the server, exactly in that moment, that's when it's computed, and we determine to send the user to the correct location. So there isn't a process where user gets to the server and the server sends them somewhere else and then the site. It happens in just that, seamless skip. What about embargoed countries? Fantastic question. Embargoed countries, I don't think are affected by this. Typically, teams build. If your application can't be served in embargoed countries, you certainly want to add some rules and blockers there. So yeah, definitely come across that before as well. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. I'm looking at these questions. I think Lisa had a great point. If you do put your questions in the Q&A section, others would be able to upvote your questions so we can get to the question that everyone is really interested in answering. And yeah.
Here, I can read off some, and I think a lot of these, Ramin, you'll be able to answer a lot better than me. So from Patrick, how do you structure your CMS or API calls based on the locale?
It's a very good question, Patrick. So with Netlify, each of your sites are going to get a build triggered from your correct CMS that's sending the content. So in the Netlify platform, you have something called build hooks. And the build hook receives information from your CMS anytime there's new content changes. So if your content, English content has been updated, it's going to call the English site directly using Netlify's build hook. So it's essentially the build hook that's going to send the correct locale to that site to build.
Yeah, and also how I've seen how that hooks in with different CMSs is a little bit different per CMS, per integration, but yeah, with those build hooks, it works perfectly.
Yeah, I just dropped the link for the build hook documentation in our chat as well.
From Edward, for sites that you would like to remember their user's preference, this typically requires some rules on the CDN to read cookies or other parameters. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great question, Ted. That is a common use case as well. So you might need to add additional things in the parameter or read things from the cookie parameter to know, is this user visitor, has they visited your site before or not? And this is a very common pattern for Netlify sites as well. I can think of one use case specifically. Teespring is one of the largest customers on the Netlify platform with over 6 million sites on Netlify. And it's an e-commerce use case. So they have internationalized their sites to different locales. And they use cookies to determine if a visitor has visited their site before and whatnot. So it is very common as part of the workflow to use the cookies to remember user preferences when they visit your site.
Yeah,
I can share a link to that documentation for you as well.
Some Netlify edge handlers might be an interesting one too.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Dragon, sorry if I pronounced your name improperly. How do you handle data boundaries in terms of EU data not leaving EU servers?
Good question. Yeah. This is really interesting topic for Jamstack, actually. So it really depends what you're building too, right? Are you building a SaaS application that is, transmitting user information? So you have to be GDPR compliant and protect user data, or is it just the static site that's almost indexed by Google, right? If it's just a static site that's indexed by Google, it's most likely a public site, and you're still keeping all of your data and information in your CMS of choice, and that's just sending API calls and it's to a static front end. So it does get a little bit interesting based on the use case. It might if again we have customers in UK who are government agencies, and obviously there's very stringent protection of data in the EU. But for static sites within those government agencies, it's been deemed that it's safe for them because it's all indexed by Google, and they hold that information securely in their database and backends anyway. So happy to talk to you specifically more, Dragan, or others who have these type of concerns on your project, and we can look at it more closely.
We got a couple that popped up to the top. What if I have a country switcher and the user's from Germany that decided to go to the US site? Is there a way to store the user selection for next time they entered the site?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is kind of ties into the cookie that I just mentioned earlier. You can leverage Netlify cookies, and also most sites have a navigation bar that says, allows users to navigate between the different locales. So that would be the ideal scenario, right? Like if you something like a Sequoia Capital site, right? Sequoia Capital is hosted on Netlify, and you would be able to toggle between the different variations of regions that they have there. So, and if you visit again and you've visited one of those locales, it would remember you.
Awesome. And Chris, I'll drop that link in. Chris was asking if we could add a link that explains what you meant by micro front end sites. I'll drop that link.
Yeah, definitely.
Bill, if you're using a micro front end architecture, would you typically keep each of the pieces that site in its own code repo? So I think this might be around monorepos versus perhaps not monorepos.
Okay, if you're using a microfront end architecture, would you typically keep each of the pieces of the site in its own code repo? Yeah, Bill, great question. It could be a monorepo. So we've seen a monorepo where each of the projects are basically a path, right? Like a sub application and path within the bigger code base, or it could be its entirely separate app, separate site. But all workflows are supported on Netlify, both of them. So it really depends on how our teams are building today, so we can match that ideal experience.
How do you handle strings in the code base and switch between them?
That's maybe you could help me elaborate a little bit more on that. Whoever asked the question, Patrick. Yeah. What you mean by strings in the code? Typically, that's maybe you can help me understand a little bit more the use case there. Yeah.
All right, I'll look for that, Patrick. Now, Phil, Dragan, I'm pretty sure we got that question earlier. How do you handle front-end CMS for each language? Is it one Netlify CMS instance or separate for each language? I think one of the patterns I've seen is where we talked about a little bit earlier. You have one CMS, but you actually have different translations for each page. And so, for example, let's just take Smartling and Contentful. Those work together, so you can actually do like a little drop down and add translations or different. We call them pancakes here at Netlify, but that's one of the strategies I've seen. So yeah, would you kindly elaborate on possible costs to your service and what are major factors to take into account when you consider to migrate to Netlify? Probably say reach out to us. Certainly, we can start a discussion. Ramin, is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Happy to specifically talk about your use case and see what would fit your needs more closely, and then we'll be sure to give you
Yeah,
the help that you need to be successful.
I think a lot of the times when we think about this, some of our customers maybe don't include all of the productivity benefits across. I don't know if you remember the slide that Ramin mentioned earlier, where it was you just push and all this stuff kind of gets handled for you. So that's one of the things that we can definitely discuss. What if your main site is UK based and redirecting the US traffic to /en-us? How would that work? Google didn't index correctly and was showing us. We use Netlify. What if your main site is UK based and redirecting the US traffic to example -en-us? I think if it's a Google indexing problem, I've seen a couple strategies doing href lang tags in the scripts, which is a little bit slower. I've also seen XML sitemap strategies. I would say part of when you get into indexing, part of this is connecting with your, if you have in-house SEO expertise, we can also help with some stuff here. But those are two strategies I've seen to help Google and push Google along in understanding where your international sites sit. What about dynamic content? Is there a service to compute that on the edge too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the Netlify workflow and platform. So if you serve dynamic content, some of it could be served with Netlify functions. Some of it could be client loaded, depending on how you build it. Some of it could be framework. Different frameworks do things differently. So it's all, I guess, dependent on how you're building it. But yes, it is certainly supported and part of the internationalized workflow.
Fran, do you support other repos besides GitHub?
Yeah, we support today Bitbucket, GitLab, and we support any other Git provider with Netlify CLI. So you can, if you have an in-house Git, for example, you can connect your in-house Git solution to Netlify using the CLI and still continue to be able to build with that workflow. Yeah, Fran, if you don't see a list of Git provider in there, I'd like to know what you're using then as well, and share that feedback with the team.
Bill, it's a good question around the talk about Jamstack for a minute. We'd love to discuss more. We have some webinars that are specifically around Jamstack, some strategies on how to do this, not just in the international context, but in a much more broad context. So definitely, I can drop a link there.
The Jamstack is interesting, Bill. If you have any specific, pointers you want to know, we could talk about it all day.
All right, maybe take one more. Preserving cookies. I think we touched a little bit on cookies at the end.
How about the Azure one? Bill just asked a good one. How does Netlify compare against doing similar solutions that would be set up in Microsoft Azure? Does Netlify make it easier, faster, cheaper than Azure? That's a great question, Bill. And I think we see this all the time as well with our customers who are already building on Azure, on AWS, on Google Cloud, or any other major cloud provider, because teams oftentimes have, IT teams have solidified infrastructure plans, and they've standardized some sort of CI/CD workflow for teams to build applications. But what we see every single time we meet with new customers and existing customers is that it takes a lot of time to get a single site deployed to production, right? Just a brand new site to go through the IT process for a lot of companies and teams. It's a process. You have to file a ticket. IT and DevOps is typically managing other applications as well. Sometimes it's got to be the backend application. Sometimes it's the main business application. A lot of times it's the marketing site they're managing. So it's not just a single property they're managing, or your central IT team. So it really slows down time to market when you have a new project and you want to go live with that project. Now, Azure has created Azure static pages or something similar. That being said, this is a very, very new product for them. So I think there's still some things to work out. And Netlify has been the Jamstack, I guess, has created the Jamstack ecosystem over 6 years ago. So we have not only a team of in-house expertise, but the platform has received all of the valuable feedback from Jamstack community members to really solidify a platform built for all Jamstack developers, whether you're using any framework, new frameworks, old frameworks that support the Jamstack. Netlify is designed not only to support that infrastructure, but also within the Netlify platform, there's tons of developer productivity benefits. So with Azure, you can't get unlimited environments with just the instant of click of a button, or preview deploys where you can collaborate with stakeholders and share feedback. And there's a lot of developer productivity benefits. For example, Netlify recently acquired a company called OneGraph, where it takes all of your existing outside APIs and creates a unifying GraphQL layer for all of your sites that you're building on Netlify. So now if you have, maybe Salesforce API, and you have Tableau API, and you have another API, you don't have to connect each of those APIs manually one by one. You connect them all to one graph, and you have a single unified GraphQL layer where you can tie in all of your products and layers into one. So Netlify, again, not just an infrastructure comparing to Azure's, CDN or whatever CI/CD. It's really a platform for web developers building front-end applications, and it really helps teams scale their applications, go to market really quickly, and not think about a lot of the setup process. Hope that answered your question, Bill.
Awesome. Thank you so much. These have been some excellent questions. Let me share my screen, and awesome. Hopefully you can see that QR code and click through.
There's Bill's question right over it. Maybe Lisa. But yeah, thank you all. I just want to say it's been a great pleasure answering your questions and working with you all today. It sounds like there's great interest in how you might be internationalizing your sites today based on the questions that I'm seeing. If you have a project that you're considering, that you're working on already, and you want to see how would this look like on Netlify and want to talk through it with an expert, myself or my colleagues, we're happy to connect with you all and set up a meeting, 30 minutes or so to understand what you're building and how we can help. So please don't hesitate to reach out and continuing asking your great questions there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.